All right. Good afternoon, everyone. We'll call this work session of the Anchorage Assembly to order. Today is December 1st. It's 1:30. We are noticed to take up our legislative program, and we'll start with introductions. Mr. Martinez.
George Martinez.
Zach Johnson.
Karen Bronga.
Felix Rivera.
Meg Zalatel.
Anna Brawley.
And legislative staff. Claire Ross.
And Allie Hartman.
Great. And Mr. Stolt is here. He just stepped out for a moment. We will, the materials for this are posted on the work session webpage if you happen to be tuning in online or via telephone. And if you don't happen to have a legislative package in front of you, there are some on the table by the nameplates. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Brawley, who is the chair of the Legislative Committee.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. And I will be brief, and then I will also be turning to staff to help us walk through this process. But just as a brief overview, what you have before you is the next iteration of the draft legislative program. So a lot of this should look familiar because it's basically a continuation of the work that the Legislative Committee has been doing. And now it is moving toward our not our final step in our legislative process, but final step in the process of developing this document. So I guess I'll say this now and then I'll reiterate at the end, so it's clear kind of what this document is for. This is the municipality's policy priorities. And so we've been working collaboratively with the administration to develop these. We obviously, a lot of us were just at the lunch with legislators to talk through some of those priorities. And so our goal is to both be broad and giving us the flexibility to talk about specific, for example, legislation as it comes up during session, but also be very targeted in our asks. And so what our task is today is really to take this opportunity to take a good look at this, have some, I guess not deliberative discussion, but questions and answers if there's any edits to the program, and really thinking about, how we're going to use this going forward. Because the goal is to bring this to Tuesday night's meeting. It will be a late on the table item. You will see on the addendum that there is an item basically with a placeholder that this document will be replaced with. And so the goal today is to get any last edits out there, partly for our benefit so that we don't deal with a whole bunch of floor amendments, last minute things, but also for staff's benefit, because we have Claire and Allie and Jennifer who have been working hard on this and need some time to turn it around. So that's partly the ask. So today we're going to be looking at this. If you have minor wording changes, you can send those to staff, but let's really talk about if there's anything that's missing in here, things to take off the list, or just any kind of shifting around that we need to do. And then let me see. So we're going to go through, I mentioned kind of broadly our process. I'll come back to kind of how we'll use this in next steps at the end. But what we really, again, want to do is get feedback. So I'll just orient folks to the document and then we can dive into it. So we've got our top 3 priorities. There is a request from the administration to talk about, do we add a fourth, or how do we fit in this issue of energy security, which is in this document, but how do we make sure that that's, front and center, balancing with the fact that we've gotten advice from many people to say, limit your priorities, right? Don't call everything a top priority. So that's one thing to look at. We also want to look at, we have both funding requests in here as well as policy requests that came up in the lunch. And also note we have legislative requests, but also some administrative requests, recognizing that the governor's office and departments have an important role in a lot of these policy issues. So I'll note that then we have our top 3 priorities. If you move on to page 6, we've got our municipality-wide priorities. So that's things that, didn't rise to the top 3, but are really important, kind of broader pieces. We can talk about that. And again, you'll see funding requests and policy requests. And then the back 2 pages of the document, and again, we'll come back to these, but the back 2 pages of the document are our district priorities. And so those are, again, more localized projects, usually capital projects. And then we've noted which House and Senate districts these projects sit in. And so we also want to check in with all members, make sure that these are all still priorities. And then also, as Claire will reiterate as well, anything that goes in this document, this is not the end of the process. We really rely on everybody to help advocate. And especially if it is a local priority, it's you guys talking to your legislators, making sure that they're putting it in the capital budget or, whatever it looks like. And so, so again, we just want to make sure that there's the connect between what's in the document and then how this gets used and talked about and brought down to Juneau in the next year. So with that, I think we'll back up to the front, front pages of the document. And the first, I guess I see folks from the administration in the back. I don't see Mia Costello. So maybe there was a piece she wanted to potentially discuss, but maybe we could move past that and come back to it. I guess from there, actually, I'll ask Claire, do you have other things you want to mention up front? Okay, Sienna, no. Okay, so why don't we start with the top 3 priorities? So again, if you have specific wording changes, we can talk about those, but just kind of take a look at the port. I'll note that there isn't a formal ask of the legislature about the port. The idea with this one is really not so much asking for more funding right now, but saying thank you for the funding you've already provided and giving an update on how we, the city, are really focusing on getting the Port of Alaska project done and moving forward.
And as we get to each one, let's just pause and talk about it so we don't have to go back. Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, thanks for that, Claire. I was going to ask that, how we're going to handle this. Can we go back to page 2? Which I know doesn't look like me, but there is something that I want to see if we can add in here. And that's specifically just because a legislator asked me about it. I think several legislators were a little bit maybe confused about what the term assembly priority means in here. And so I'm wondering if perhaps in this blue box section, we can add just a brief explanation of how this came together, what assembly priority means. And, if you don't see assembly priority in here, then that means that's something that we have agreed on between the 2 branches as our joint priorities, to make that explicitly clear, because I think that was somewhat unclear to some legislators.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. And actually, following the luncheon, I asked Legislative Services staff if they could actually indicate the code section by which we need to adopt a legislative policy. Like, we have a duty under code to adopt a legislative program. So pursuant to whatever the code section is, because it becomes the adopted policy of the municipality at that time. You want to go ahead, Ms. Brawley?
Yeah, thank you. And actually, that maybe we could pause on that general topic. Oh.
Ms. Bronga.
Thanks. So on that page 2, it doesn't say assembly priorities. It says Muni of Anchorage priorities. So maybe, are you saying it should say assembly priorities, or just a little more explanation of how the Muni and the assembly came together for this?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So essentially what I'm requesting is, so there's 2, and maybe at the end of this, maybe 3 things that are going to be outlined here as assembly priorities. So one of them is page 4. The second item in the blue box is as an assembly priority. The second one is on page 9 as at the very end, assembly priority. And then I imagine we'll probably have a little conversation around the school funding thing. And so those I think just making a little bit clear about what that means.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, great. Go ahead, Ms. Brawley.
Thank you. And actually, that's something, this is kind of a big picture discussion. It came out in the luncheon today, but we were thinking about it before. So we have, the goal of this document is that it's the municipality's priorities. And you heard from legislators saying, when we're in Juneau, we want to be able to point and say, this is something that is the municipality's priorities. But there's also the reality that that we do have, different perspectives on things. And so we know, for example, the Assembly is a strong supporter of defined benefits, and we've taken a stance on that. But we also know, as Mayor Bronson said, he's neutral on that point. So one, we were kind of brainstorming after the meeting. One idea we had is to not change up this whole document, not change our top 3 priorities. We could have some kind of indication, and I don't know exactly how we'd want to do it, but having something where it might say like the mayor's top priority or personal priority or something like that. I'm not sure the wording. And then a way to have some assembly priorities identified, which gives, gives a nod to the fact that maybe we do have different perspectives on things, but we're advocating on behalf of the city. So that was a thought we had, but just wanted to get feedback on that.
Mr. Martinez.
Yes, thank you. Just to go a little further down on that part of the discussion. Any branch of government can send a letter at any time to advocate for a piece of legislation or et cetera, right? I think this is, from my vantage point, this document represents, as identified, the municipality's priorities. The process that you've held, Chair, and to the members and the participation and the staff, even up to the administration, has been phenomenal in creating a consensus document, essentially. And the consensus is, to the point that the mayor described today at the luncheon, was there's really nothing in this that I'm opposed to. So from my vantage point, I think the clearer we are to the question of, does the municipality support this position, is different than saying, and respectfully, is different than saying, like the mayor described, his own personal vantage point, how Dave would want defined benefits or contributions meets his role as an elected official, and that may be different. And so if there's a battle on any of these items, then that should be hashed out. It should have been hashed out. And I don't think sectioning out the difference between the mayor and the administration is particularly savvy, because the question that was raised today in the workshop was, if I went down to Juneau and I asked could I say that the mayor supports this action? It was a very interesting response, but fundamentally, we should negotiate all of that out here. We will still, as a body, take an action on the BSA, for example, with our joint resolution with the school board, right? And so we have the ability to take other kind of steps forward, but the not being in conflict with any of these things, we don't have the luxury of saying abstain, right? We say yes or no, and then if the administration is so far up the nose, then we have that negotiation now. But when we publish this, I think it should just be a unified voice from the municipality. It's my vantage point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. I tend to agree. We haven't separated out branch priorities in the past. We should be able to go and say, and the legislature should be saying, these are the priorities of the municipality, not the priorities of the assembly or the mayor, but the priorities of the municipality. It is that unified voice. So we've been joined by Ms. Costello. And are anything else on that first kind of structural piece? Or, yep, Ms. Ross.
I was just thinking maybe you could summarize some of your discussion so Ms. Costello could give her 2
Sure.
cents on that.
So we started, we got a quick overview, and then we started on the first page, or the first inside page, as we often do, and went into a discussion about what it meant, particularly from the luncheon, about an assembly priority versus the mayor's position on something. The conversation went from there's a code site that we have to adopt a legislative program, and then that becomes the policy position of the municipality, to how we would want to indicate that either this is a joint program, or if we need to indicate where there are differences between the branches of government. And I think that we've given feedback now to Ms. Brawley and Legislative Services, and we will see what lands on the table Tuesday night. And okay, well, if anybody else wants to weigh in, I think now might be the time. Ms. Ross.
I guess I could add that in a first draft that Ms. Costello and I had, we did have a line in the introduction saying what Mr. Rivera had said of denoting, and it just felt like it was pointing out too much of the differences like Mr. Martinez was getting at. And so that's why we just made it a little bit more subtle of the ones that were assembly priorities we noted. But then obviously in the luncheon today, that was causing confusion. And I don't want, I don't want to put the mayor in a position where he's embarrassed and having to backpedal. I mean, of course, we'll all agree on it and then he'll see it when the time comes. But anyhow, so I don't know the answer.
Thank you, Mr. Cross.
Yeah, I completely agree with Mr. Martinez. I think this needs to, I think this needs to be completely unified front. There can't be anything that says, here's assembly priorities and here's the mayor priorities, here they came in. This is our priorities, period.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Ms. Costello.
Thank you, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and all the work that has been put into this document. Really appreciate that, Claire and everyone. Really, there's only 2 items where the mayor won't necessarily be advocating for them. They actually are the 2 items that were brought up at the luncheon. In one area on page 9 for the defined benefit, at the bottom, the way we resolved it is just by putting it there, assembly priority. Now, in the past, when you look at these documents, it is a unified front. I mean, essentially, everything in here is unified. It is a living document, and it is not a standalone piece. So the intention of the document is that you make the visit in the office, and let's say, for example, Member Rowley, you might flip to the section that is your part of town and be talking about that. And then the other things that you might have more involvement in, say, for example, you sat on a committee, so you can speak to those things. In the past, the BSA increase has been in the document. And I think when, the mayor came down and I was there, he literally only talked about the port. Whereas when the assembly members came, it was talking about a few more things because you have specific interests in those areas. So I think it is important that it's a unified document. I think for 99% of it, it is. There's just that one where currently the only item now that says assembly priority at the very bottom is the defined benefit issue. The mayor is going to be focusing mostly on the top 3 and then the 4th item for Cook Inlet gas, which he mentioned today.
Okay, thank you. I found the code section. It's 2.10.075, and we don't have counsel with us today. That's state legislative program. And it says, with recommendations from the mayor and assembly members, the assembly by December 10th shall adopt the legislative program. And then it says it shall be among the prescribed duties of the mayor to implement the annual legislative program approved by the assembly under section A through research, dissemination of information, and advocacy before state legislative and administrative bodies. So that's the framework in which this document is created. Mr. Solt.
Thank you. So I guess to Ms. Costello, so to try to make it more unified, maybe get rid of that assembly priority connotation. Help me understand, is the mayor ambivalent? Or, because he said he wasn't for or against, which to me, he can still support the general, it's a priority, but he doesn't have a dog in the fight as far as the outcome.
Thank you. I think what you heard the mayor say today is that he's agnostic on it. And I understand the code and what it's saying, but it would literally be impossible for one individual to advocate on every single one of these items and to get them through the legislative process. And so I'm just saying he's agnostic on those 2 items.
Okay, I'm hoping this is giving you all enough direction. Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll add on as well. I know the code does specifically reference the mayor, but I know part of the goal from the legislative committee and really for all members is that we all take an active role, whether folks are going directly to Juneau or just speaking to their representatives. So we do see it as a group effort for sure. And knowing, that there is a lot of asks on here. And so some are going to move faster than others, but that's certainly, we're not leaving it to one person either. Thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, thank you. So I just want some clarification from Ms. Costello. So you said 2 items. The second item that you're speaking of, is that the increased public school funding? Is that what you're speaking to? Okay, got it. So then there are actually 3 items in here. Thanks.
Okay, so we're going to go Mr. Martinez, and then we're going to wrap this up to get into the meat of the rest, and then we'll see where we fall out on Tuesday night. Mr. Martinez?
Great. And just to close this, it's considering where we're landing with respect to, sounds like some sort of consensus around the idea that this is a unified voice of the municipality of Anchorage, and there have been some suggestions to remove the differentiation. Perhaps that same concept could just be reiterated upstairs, the difference between the functional role and the rhetoric that one will use in their political space. And so I think the question today really highlighted something that need to be worked on and massaged upstairs, which is the municipality of Anchorage does have these priorities. It's in the document, right? No one necessarily needs to know unless you're making a different point. But that point may not necessarily be valid at that particular time, especially when we're saying that we want a unified voice with this document down in Juneau. And whether one particular person champions one aspect of that is different than saying that's not the unified voice of the municipality, which I think we got close to that today, and it was a little awkward. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Brawley, you want to move us on to the next part?
Yeah, thank you. So we have been, good discussion. Moving on to the top three priorities. So we've got the Port of Alaska. As I said, we're not putting a financial ask out there for this session, but really, it's still a top priority. One thing as we were looking through this that we approached this document was consistency, knowing that things do come up over time and policy issues evolve, but we wanted to be clear that the port is still a very high priority. It's our number one here. Housing is a very high priority. And then mental health and behavioral health is a very high priority because those are also things where the state has there's a direct role that the state can play. So I think just asking with any of those three priorities, not necessarily getting into the weeds on the content, but just if there's comments on these. And then I also want to make space for Ms. Costello wanted to advocate to add a number 4. So, or at least to elevate one to a number 4 position. So,
Okay, let's go with the 3 and then we can talk about the 4.
Yeah.
Okay, any comments on them? I do have a request and I thought I had submitted it, but maybe I only submitted it in my head and didn't make the email happen. That tends to happen. It would be a legislative request. It would be policy only, and it wouldn't be money. It would be to extend the time period landlords need to give for notice before raising rents. Right now, rents are able to be raised with 30 days notice and instead raising it to a 90-day notice period. The idea there is it will help landlords retain tenants more likely because people will have a longer runway, so they have to pay more, which will actually hopefully retain their tenancy and defray the costs that landlords have associated with turning over units, advertising them, et cetera. It's basically if you can wait a little bit, you'll still get your money, but you are less likely to have someone who can't pay and then are subject to eviction. Mr. Cross. Okay.
Give me. We don't want to create a system where there's an incentive to evict a tenant because I imagine if you evict somebody and put a new tenant in, and you wouldn't have to give them 90 days notice. So be careful that you don't unintentionally create a new problem where a landlord has to increase rents. Perhaps that individual has been in that unit and they haven't raised their rents in 6 years, and now they're trying to get up to market and the property's not performing or they're losing money. So don't create a situation where because of the financial restraints on the owner, they have to evict a tenant just so that they can increase the rent in a timely manner. So careful that we don't create more problems than we're solving.
Sure. Heard. And that's why it's only a 90-day versus, going from 30 to 90 and nothing longer. Any other changes, requests, things that might have been missed, Ms. Ross?
Is that something you all want to put in?
I thought I had made that request.
I've never seen
so,
it
okay,
before, but I
did
must
make
have
it-
seen some notes of yours because I saw a piece of paper with that written, but I didn't know where it came from. And
Well, I would like to include it, but, and I already have someone who's willing to sponsor the bill. So, but if I also don't want us to hack this up on Tuesday night on the dais.
Yeah, I off the cuff, I don't support it, and I would want to talk to property owners and talk to property managers about what the unintended consequences would be by talking to those involved in the industry. I would sense some immediate apprehension, but want to know realistically what are the financial ramifications that were for all those involved. before I would support it. So that's just my position. I'd have to chew on it. I don't support it right out of the gate. So but I'm one of 12.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So, I'm just reading the title of this section and some of the explanation of this section. And while I think I may be supportive of the idea, I think I might need to chew on it a little bit more. I don't necessarily know, though, if it fits with the content of this section, which just, looking at the title, is increasing housing supply and addressing homelessness. I mean, I guess you could say maybe it's addresses homelessness because it gives people more time before a rent increase goes up. But really, a lot of these things are focused on producing more housing and funding for homelessness. And so I don't see how it fits thematically with this section.
Okay, I mean, it was the number one driver of family homelessness last winter for families flowing into emergency cold weather shelter. But that's fine. I'm sorry, I didn't, I guess, get it out. So I would think we should just move on. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just briefly, this is maybe an illustration too of something that is a specific thing that could become a specific bill that I think still fits under this broad rubric. So let's say this had come up 2 months from now after this has been published. Another valid path for this to happen is to say, housing and addressing homelessness is one of our top priorities. This fits under that broad bucket. So even if the text isn't in the document, I think there's still a way to get there. It could be a resolution. And again, recognizing there may be disagreement on this particular topic, but that's another path to use this in the way that it's intended.
Okay, anything else on 1 through 3, Kevin or Mr. Cross?
Yeah, on number 2, middle of the page, we have the $4 million operating request for fiscal year. That says assembly priority. Mia, can you speak to what the mayor's position on it? I would like to remove anything that says assembly priority and just make sure it's our priority.
Madam Chair.
Can you speak on that one, whether it's safe to remove assembly priority after that one?
So are you talking about the
Blue-
second paragraph in the box?
That's exactly right.
So the mayor is in support of additional funding for housing and homelessness. I think the reason that this says assembly priority is because it has to do with the limiting of the number of people in the shelter. So that might just be, I can go back to him and say, is it fine if we take assembly priority off? Because the larger concept of the problem, he's definitely on board as being a priority.
So to follow up, if we amended it to say to operate a year-round shelter and eliminated a specific count, could we get the mayor to jump in so we could remove assembly priority and it could be our priority?
I can ask him and I can
All right.
get back to you very
Thank you.
quickly.
Okay, Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm not opposed to that, just as long as we're all super clear that the code says 150 is the max. So yeah, but that's fine. So we can take it out and it still says the same thing because we're going to follow the law.
Ms. Brawley.
I would suggest, because I'm in line with what Mr. Rivera said. Another option would be to take out the word A, because I think there's been a discussion about shelter as a concept and it can look like different things. And maybe maybe it ends up being more than one location. We have more than one shelter now. So maybe that's a way to say shelter as a service. And then we're not necessarily tying it to a building. And then we can still say location pending, because I think that's still true, but that's another way to handle it.
Okay, anything else on 1 through 3? Just to note for the record, Mr. Martinez has now joined us on the phone. Okay, momentarily. Great. Okay, let's move on past the first 3 priorities to talk about how we want to, or if we want to add a 4. Ms. Costello, would you like to explain what you might want to do?
Yes, thank you. So in the meetings that we had prior to this point in time, I had brought the subject up as a main priority to consider because of the nature of the energy problem that we're facing, imminent problem that we're facing here in Anchorage with the possibility of having to import natural gas, with the specific concern about how it's going to affect Anchorage residents. And so I was under the assumption, perhaps incorrectly, that that would be brought up as the number 4 priority. And so the language that the mayor's office had provided, which for this subject area was not included. I've had conversations with Claire about perhaps it was a lack of space issue. And so I think that the language that we had proposed would fit nicely under what we have now on page 9 at the top. The mayor is interested in it being the number 4 priority. However, I spoke with him both before the lunch and after the lunch, and if it has to remain on page 9, then it does. However, he just believes that it really deserves a higher placement. And when he goes to Juneau, he's actually planning on talking about it, like we talked about, using this document, flipping to that page and saying, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I myself, Ms. Brawley, Ms. Ross. So I don't know exactly how this strategy that he's put forward here fits with our climate action plan in particular, because we already have an adopted policy of the municipality around energy and climate action. Also, we haven't really been briefed like the mayor's been briefed. No one's asked to bring this to the Enterprise and Utilities Oversight Committee meeting or anything like that to bring us fully up to speed. So not saying no, I'm just saying that we would need additional briefing so that we can be just as educated. I also feel like that there's a bit of tension in here as to renewable energy versus, which is the adopted policy of the municipality versus some of the things that are suggested here. So that's my first blush, but I haven't read House Bill 154, Senate Bill 125, but generally a green bank is okay. But I want to make sure we're not just greenwashing other things that really aren't going to improve the situation, particularly in South Central Alaska. Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thank you. And just to point folks to, again, the top of page 9. So we had a little bit of discussion about this. The reason I'm hesitant to add a number 4 is because of the advice that we got back in, I think, July when we had our lobbyist, Wendy Chamberlain, speak. She was really saying you should consider having one priority that you call your top priority. And of course, that's challenging because we have a lot of challenges. And so what we were talking about at the end of the luncheon, myself and staff, was that we can certainly move it up. I think it doesn't need to be kind of one of the several list of things. And then maybe we give it more prominence on this municipality-wide priorities, which is, I'm looking at page 6, or somewhere like that, where it's more front and center. Maybe we put an extra photo with it that really talks, because we know that this is an issue. I think no one disagrees that, that we need to figure out the gas situation. But I also want to make sure that we are thinking short-term and long-term, because short-term there is that need. Long-term is the looking at the broader portfolio of renewables, and certainly we can look back at the wording too and make sure that it works for everybody.
Ms. Ross.
I was just going to publicly apologize to Ms. Costello, because when I looked at what she sent me and what came in, we butchered it pretty good and kind of did change her intent. So we do have her original language that we'll put back in there. And then I was just going to maybe hand it over to Ms. Hartman to see if you had wanted to talk about some of your ideas for formatting.
Yeah. Anna mentioned, this is Allie Hartman for the record. Anna mentioned there being space on page 6 where we could elevate it in this section to the top. And that could work well. If it is elevated to a number 4 priority, I just wanted to flag that this book will get bigger. We don't have space currently. And so this will go from a 12-page booklet to a 16-page booklet, which then also means that there's maybe some other wiggle room for other additions and that kind of thing. So just keeping those layout things in mind.
Thank you. I would be comfortable putting the statutory and policy requests before the funding requests, reversing that on page 6, and then making sure under our statutory and policy requests it says energy reliability and affordability with the additional word changes that may need to occur in that section. So actually, right after page 6 would be that thing listed right here. So me pointing to what would be new page 7. Kevin, or sorry, Mr. Cross. Okay. Go ahead, Ms. Costello.
Thank you, Member Zalatel. So just to respond to your comment about whether or not this paragraph, this section currently would work with what the mayor's office is intending, what I see is that this is a long-term solution, and the state actually does have a renewable policy on the books, so that there's no conflict there. I think what we're looking at is the short-term addressing of the importing of natural gas, which is at our doorstep.
What's the specific ask? Because what I get from this paragraph here is no specific ask to the legislature to take, or the governor to take specific decisive action in the short term. And I think that's where I lack the clarity.
May I? So the governor is in the process of drafting legislation. The mayor has not seen it, but conceptually, it is to incentivize investment in Cook Inlet. Those bills, the pre-file date will be released on January 8th. And so we will have the actual bill number at that point in time. So if we did include that language that we had presented to you earlier, I would just suggest we say, any policy efforts that would help achieve that goal, so that you leave it open, because we don't know the bill numbers, but then we're looking at it and allowing the legislators to say, I agree with this policy, this direction, but in overall addressing the energy sustainability in South Central.
Okay, Ms. Brawley.
Another way to think about this, and again, this is really kind of how do we visually communicate what our priorities are without it feeling overwhelming? Because certainly there's a lot of things in here. One thought would be keep the top 3 as they are, and really a lot of those are persistent challenges, right? Like housing and homelessness has been a persistent challenge. I mean, the port has been a many-year project. So, and I know that it's not that energy itself is a new thing, but this is really coming up as a big issue. So, what if we called that maybe an emerging priority, or some, and not something, because I think we do want to speak to, like, this is something that is coming up, and it is, and we do have this opportunity to include it, and maybe that's a way to also kind of couch it before we have these kind of the more mundane, I guess, municipal priorities. So again, it's really just, I guess, marketing more than anything, the way that we're doing it. But that's a way to distinguish and not have to go to 16 pages, but also not have to say we have a lot of top priorities.
Okay. So that gets us to 1, 2, 3, and a first statutory and policy request on page 7 with the reordering. You want to pick it up from there?
Yeah, so now we're looking at what's currently on page 6. We've got these municipality-wide priorities. So these were things that certainly they're all important. We have not identified them as being top 3, but they're just also things that we really need to address. So I'll just briefly note, we have full funding for the Community Assistance Program. That's consistent with the Alaska Municipal League, who has been advocating for that for all communities. We address school funding. We'll have our resolution next Friday on that topic. Anchorage infrastructure funding. Oh, this was another one that came out of the legislative luncheon, and of course, out of all of the things that we've been talking about and experiencing since the first snowfall. Under Anchorage infrastructure funding, this gets back to the question that Representative Coulombe asked, should we add another line here, and what would it look like in terms of maybe it's a state match, I think one idea was to say that the Department of Transportation should have adequate funding to basically be able to give the same level of service as the municipality with that 84-hour plow out. So it could either be a dollar amount, or it could be expressing it that way if we don't have a dollar amount. But something about snow plowing, I guess, is where I'm going. So I don't know if others have thoughts about what that should be worded as, or how we address that.
I would like something that might say, as a policy request, like alignment and prioritization of state plowing snow removal plans consistent with local jurisdictions, or something like that. I'm sure it could be shorter than that, because it wouldn't just be us, right? Because if DOT does something, which I have learned through the Highway Safety Improvement Program, they like to look at something statewide. And so saying, hey, can you do something local jurisdiction based? Mr. Stolt?
Yeah, just in support of that, because I mean, we all seen the complaints we get of plows driving over different roads, but more of a coordinated effort. And My personal opinion is that some of these state roads, O'Malley, Huffman, are they really state roads, or should they long-term plan transferred to the municipality?
Ms. Ross.
I was going to ask Ms. Costello, the mayor did mention the need for 10 million capital for snow plow equipment. Is that something that could be put in here, or is that something that doesn't work if you don't get the additional staff to operate it?
I would like to call for help if that's possible.
Yeah, go ahead.
And while Mr. Colhase is coming up, I'll just note, yeah, I think we recognize we need to put something in here about plowing. I think in the context of what we're talking about with the legislature, it should be a funding request. And I think what they were asking for is basically what funding needs to be available for DOT, but we should also think about the wording that speaks to that alignment and kind of level of service.
All right, Ms. Costello, what is your need for Mr. Colhase?
I just do not feel qualified in answering a question that involves an immediate emergency situation we just experienced and what, the plan and commitment is going forward.
okay.
Thank you.
So Mr. Colhase, would you feel strongly if we asked the state to consider a policy that it does alignment of DOT snow removal with local jurisdictions?
I would like to do the state the courtesy of talking with them before it appears in a document that they don't have any input on. I'd like to make sure that they're aware that we're putting a coordination request in before it goes forward. What's the timing on this?
Tuesday night, of course. It's
Okay.
Tuesday night, and we're going to be talking with the state the next day about snow.
Yep.
Yeah, this is really Monday because then the document will be published.
I think if it was, I would like to talk with Sean Hall and the Central Region Director just to make sure, but I think if it was an affirmative statement that collaboration is a good thing and required, I think we could do that. I just don't want to appear to be, pointing fingers or casting aspersions on their efforts.
Mr. Cross.
I wouldn't limit it to just snow, though. I would just keep it better a more fluid cooperation on the unique transportation needs or for Anchorage, because right now it's snow, but come spring it's potholes, and then it's road construction and pushing all that traffic that goes normally on New Seward onto our artillery roads and around, and the extra wear and tear and I just look at it like it's snow now, but give us 90, 120 days and it'll be some other issue with Department of Transportation we're dealing with. And at least for my short term on AMATs, that's been my experience.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Alignment and coordination of maintaining transportation infrastructure is where I've landed with language so far. It's really broad, but I think it kind of gets to the point. Maintaining transportation infrastructure. Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, Kent, if you have specific wording to recommend, or it doesn't have to be a dollar amount, but I think what we heard from the legislative lunch was really legislators thinking ahead to session and saying, these are things that I know I'm going to need to be advocating for. I know there's going to be a lot of discussions with DOT, I'm sure, with both transportation committees. And so I think they're really just looking to us to make sure that we're asking for that, even if it's not really specific at this point, but just to basically to have their back so that they can advocate for Anchorage's interest. So I think that is alignment. I do like the idea of mentioning year round. We can say winter and year round maintenance. And then it's really just a talking point that we can spin off of as we're having conversations.
And that also is supported by, when you go back, we get further back, we talk about district asks. Within the districts, we have transportation needs. And I think it's important that everything we do is pointing at the next tier up. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Russ.
I'm not sure if you addressed my question, Mr. Colhase. I don't think you heard it. The mayor mentioned a $10 million capital need for snow plowing equipment. I was wondering if that should go in here, or if it can only be done if you get more staff to match the equipment.
To Ms. Ross, unfortunately, I was not at the luncheon, but I presume he was referring to what would be required to staff with equipment and personnel to respond to a record snowfall in the same time we would respond to a normal snowfall. So I think that was, I'm speculating that was more illustrative than a request. We haven't made a decision in any form to double our staffing and our equipment right now.
My thought was just as people are running for election next summer, everyone's going to want to put on their campaign materials. I funded snowplowing equipment, so I feel like whatever Anchorage asked for, we would get.
So I think that was a request to see if there's an ask between you and Ms. Costello for any additional investment in snow plowing in Anchorage.
We can discuss that with the mayor.
Okay, great. I would say we would need to know Monday before noon. Okay, Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thank you. And I think for now, I think there's agreement that we want to put something in there. So we'll have a placeholder as we're working through the draft and just know that that's what'll go in there. Just to note as well, in the legislative luncheon, the mayor also talked about basically having to repair equipment. I think there was a piece of equipment that had some damage too. So I think some of it is really just maintaining the fleet we have is my guess. But yeah, you guys should coordinate, then just let us know what this should say.
Okay, we have about 15 minutes left. So anything else on the funding requests and statutory and policy requests? Good picture choices. They're beautiful. Yeah, Ms. Russ.
I have one. I don't usually comment on policy for you, but I just have one thing to throw out for consideration when you're talking earlier about uniformity. For the defined benefits, could the title be changed to something like improved retirement contributions for the workforce? And then you could still leave that the assembly passed resolution supporting the benefits, but then leave it more open.
Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, and I think what you're getting at, Ms. Ross, is it says assembly priority. So we're thinking of what can we say that's broad enough that we can comfortably say that everybody supports it. Is that right?
Okay, and so the idea would be in both the red text, take out the word defined and create and fund a benefit option in the bold, and then the resolution will speak for itself. I don't have any problems with that. Anybody have any problems with that? Ms. Bronga?
I don't have a problem, but I was thinking strengthen retirement benefits for public employees.
Go ahead.
Well, this issue has been before the legislature for quite some time. I think public safety, there's a report that talks about, retaining and recruiting qualified public safety. So I don't think anyone is unfamiliar with the lines that have been drawn and the solutions that are out there. I think that if the legislature has been struggling with, specifically how this looks in a law and the impact that it has to the state coffers, which could be, as the mayor mentioned, quite significant if you don't plan it correctly. I think it's reasonable to assume that people are going to come out on different sides of an issue, or maybe not be completely ready. When I'm speaking from the legislator's point of view, ready to actually, push the button on something. So I think the mayor would probably be supportive of softening the way it's presented. However, at the end of the day, I think everyone knows the bills. You've got one in the Senate, Senate Bill 88. You've got the House bill that's in State Affairs in a special committee that's waiting for the other one to come over. So it will be studied in a special committee in the State Affairs Committee. So the answer is yes. I think that would go in a better direction. But I do want to mention that this isn't just a generalized concept. It's something that has been presented and has been debated and has had multiple committees, gone through multiple sessions, and it's still working its way through. It's a very complex issue. So I just wanted to put that on the record.
Sure, and we realize that. We've been very involved in this, and we've heard from some of our labor organizations that they very much want this, and we have our policy statement, which is the resolution. Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, I think just to clarify, I mean, I think part of the purpose is right now it says assembly priority. So the question is, one option is just strike assembly priority. It still reads defined benefits. And I think that gets to your point, Ms. Costello, about, just being clear about what is on the table right now, but also recognizing there is diversity of opinion. So I think that's really the question is if we're striking assembly priority, is it possible to still leave defined benefits? I know a lot of us on this body support that, but also recognizing it's not universal. So that's really the choice is do we change the way we word it or not? Because we are going to strike the assembly priority.
Thank you. Mr. Cross?
What if it said sustainable benefits or I'm trying to think of another way that doesn't agitate or see as if we're pushing in one specific until.
Well, we already made a policy statement and we have a past resolution, but the title suggestion by Ms. Bronga that we got a lot of head nods to were strengthened retirement benefits.
Okay.
Is that
one.
okay?
I like that one a lot. Thanks.
I just want to say, I think I mentioned the wrong bill number, and I don't want to be disrespectful to the sponsor of Senate Bill 88, whatever that might be. So I think it's Senate Bill 35.
Isn't that what's in here? It's in a bill. Okay, the two in the current draft we're looking at are HB 22 and SB 35. So we'll just need to verify all bill numbers before we hit publish. Yeah, Mr. Johnson.
So just to make sure I'm clear on the change we're talking about here, we're talking about changing just the title to say something to the effect of strengthened, but we're leaving the body of the of this proposal the same?
Yes, except create and fund a benefit option for in the bold, but the text remains the same.
Okay.
I might swap the text to have that first paragraph first because that's the more generic statement anyhow. It gets to the meat of it a little bit more.
Generally, that's maybe what you'll see on Tuesday, because honestly, we're providing all this feedback. They're going to take it with Ms. Brawley and do something, and then it'll be before us. Mr. Johnson?
Yeah, okay. I guess I'm trying to be open-minded here. And I like the idea that we're working towards something of a consensus document, but I guess all feels a little funny in my mind when we're saying we're going to tweak a couple of the words here, but really we're talking about defined benefit plan, right? I mean, I don't think there's anything else that's really been put on the table as achieving the same effect when it comes to employee retirement benefits. So I don't know. I wonder if we're almost just kind of unnecessarily muddying the waters. And I'll be honest, that is an open question in my mind that I'll continue to chew on. And I'm curious to see the language here, but yeah, I'm still, I guess, a little unclear on what we're hoping to achieve through this change. Because I mean, I think if we we water it down, I'm not sure if that necessarily means that we're going to see stronger advocacy on this issue, if we're going to see an actual different proposal taken up by the legislature. So anyway, that's just where I am on this.
Okay, yeah, as I said, we'll see where we land on Tuesday. All right. Anything else within these statutory and policy and funding requests, or turning to then right after district priorities? Because we have about 6 minutes. Ms. Brawley?
Yeah, just very briefly, I just wanted to point to election reform. That is something that I know Chair Constant and prior Chair LaFrance had been advocating for in Juneau. So that's another example of where it's not just what goes in the document, it's really ongoing support.
Mr. Johnson?
Yeah, just real quick. My calendar says we're noticed until 3 p.m. So is it 2:30?
Oh, dang. Okay,
So I think we
good.
might have a little bit more time.
I'm just used to an hour, so that's my fault. I'm just trying to keep you all going too. We have another one at 3 regardless, but thank you for calling me out. I appreciate that much. Ms. Brawley, would you like to turn us to district priorities?
Yeah, and I'm glad we have a little bit more time. So if you turn to page 10 and 11, we've got our district priorities. And so this is one where, again, just to note, this is where each of us in our areas can talk specifically with our legislators about, mostly road projects, but you'll see there's a variety of things on here. And so what we want to check in on is again, we also don't want to be striking out other people's priorities, but we want to be strategic about what we're asking. And so with this, actually, I'm going to turn to Ms. Ross to kind of explain, because again, we want to make sure we have a clear connection between what's in this document and then what we do, and then making sure that it moves through the processes that it needs to. So Claire, maybe you can talk about the CIB.
Okay, I have 2 points. One, the question is if you want to cut your lists back at all. As you can see, Eagle River has it pretty short and sweet, so maybe they'll get more of their stuff funded. Maybe the longer list won't. But I think there's obviously space here, so it's up to you and your district partner how you want to approach that. And then the second thing, I'm really glad Mr. Kohlhase is here. I think in our research, we found that most of these projects are not in the CIB. And to clarify, CIB is the budget that is getting proposed for next year, the state legislative request and what goes on the bond. And then CIP is the 5 or 6 year plan. So some of these projects might be in the CIP, but not the CIB. And then some of them might have come from a department director or community council and might not be a real project yet that has a scope and cost. And so I know each department loads their items into CAPSIS. And so what I'm afraid might happen is that your projects don't get loaded into CAPSIS, the state's system for capital projects. And so even though you go down to Juneau and you're so excited to promote it, it doesn't have a chance of getting funded because it's not in there. And so we're trying to figure out a process to make sure that all of your items get loaded. And maybe Mr. Kohlhase could give his 2 cents on how the city is approaching it. And Meg's giving me a very questioning, Ms. Zalazal's giving me a
I
questioning
would
face.
like a little bit of clarification. When you say the CIB and the CIP, are you talking about the states or ours?
The Muni.
Okay, great. So we just passed our CIB and our CIP. And so if these aren't in it, both of those programs are always available for amendment and can be further amended. And then are you saying then that in order to get these moved into CAPSIS at the legislative level, they need to be in the CIB or CIP?
So the process is, and I'll hand this over to Mr. Kohlhase in a minute, but there's a person, Greg or Gary Jones, who goes through the CIB, and his job is to load that all into CAPSIS. So he'll probably just look at the CIB and move all of those things, and then Parks and Rec might have theirs that they move forward. And so I'm saying if it's not in the CIB, there's no one in charge of putting it into the state system. And I believe from the state that they're pretty strict that if it's not in CAPSIS by their deadline, which is, and Ms. Costello could speak to this, by their deadline, it has a really hard chance of getting onto the budget.
Got it. Thank you for the clarification. I know in Midtown, we often work directly with the legislative staff that is helping champion the project to put it into CAPSIS. But
Exactly. And that's the option. I just want to make sure that each of your projects, you know that you'll need to do that.
Okay. Mr. Kohlhase, do you have anything to add to that?
Not specifically. I don't want to put her on the spot, but I thought Ms. Costello had offered a side comment to me regarding CAPSIS. Did you have anything to add to that, Ms. Costello? No, okay, sorry. So I guess that's all I have, Madam Chair.
Ms. Bronga.
So I was asking Claire about the East Anchorage list. George and I went through CIP lists of the neighborhoods or the community councils in our area, found the ones that most crossed each other so that they were benefiting more than one community council. And as luck would have it, none of these are on the CIB list. And so I know they've been mentioned on CIP. So now I'm going to talk with Kent and Parks and Rec and in some way figure out how to get them on a list or make sure that they get on the CAPSIS. So.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I know we've even received some money for one in Midtown, the sound barrier fence project on Northern Lights, and it's just not enough. And so we need to go back and ask for more. And so it's interesting that it's not in a capital improvement budget or a capital improvement program. Are we missing some essential feature here, Mr. Kohlhase?
well, we probably have the wrong people in the room here, meaning me. For example, the sound barrier project was on our CIP list, and we received project-specific funding, and including a bump, I think, from Senator Gray Jackson for that work. So it would have been on the CIP at some point. If a project is completed, it'll drop off the CIP. I don't have the CIP in front of me. We can take a look at some of these. In general, I would say that, the CIP, the 6-year plan, is developed through input from a variety of locations and sources. I'm speaking primarily for roads projects, because that's my extensive experience. Those projects come from street maintenance. They come from identified needs through the PM&E department. They come from the community's council surveys. And then they're ranked and scored and ranked rather, and added into the CIP on a year-by-year basis. So adding new projects now just to get them into the state funding stream, I would have to talk with Gary Jones. I'm not sure whether it's required. It sounded to me like somebody, perhaps you, Felix, said that the state can add them into CAPSIS on their own, which would seem to be a cleaner process right now.
Got it. And this, we've been looking at the CIP and CIB process. So this is just something else to add to the list as we look at refining that. Ms. Brawley?
Yeah, thank you. Building on that, I think the goal, we know that all these things were brought forward because they're community priorities. And so I think, as Member Zolotel said, we're still figuring out how to get some of those wrinkles in our internal processes or city processes. So I think it's more an ask to say, if someone puts this on a list, especially if it is a new project, that it needs to go back and track through our other processes, which we can update. But you're right that state legislative members can also add CAPSIS projects. And so I think for the short term, if there's something that isn't already in the list for this year, that would be the process. Talk to your legislators, talk to your senator in particular, if it's a capital request. But longer term, we do want to stitch these things together. So it's not, because we're trying to guess even what some of these are, knowing that they've been on the list, but not really sure if they're not connected to something that we have documentation of. One question I had specifically, to change topics a little bit. So we were framing these, this is something I'm still not clear in my head. We were framing them as district priorities, meaning the folks in our districts, right? And then bringing those forward. But I'll use one example. Under the South Anchorage priorities, 100th and Victor is actually now, it's right on the border of South Anchorage and West Anchorage. And so so I certainly see the value in that, right? But it wasn't something that I personally brought forward. So I wonder if there's any of these other ones. The other one I flagged maybe is the Campbell Creek Trail, which is under the East Anchorage list, but that particular project is in part of the Midtown district. So that was just kind of something I wanted to address is are we talking about the physical boundaries of the districts, or are we talking about members who are bringing, our constituents' requests? Because I think there's some tension there a little bit.
Yeah, I caught Campbell Creek Trail pretty specifically when I was reading that list, because that is kind of in the heart of the Midtown district, and the Campbell Park Community Council in particular has been advocating for that since my predecessor, Mr. Trainee, came on the body, I think originally, which would have been 20 plus years ago at this point. And I'm also not sure about the intersection of this when these projects are also listed for AMATS funding, because both the Campbell Creek Trail and the Northern Lights Upper Goss Street pedestrian crossing improvements, I think, are both in the AMATS tip right now. And I don't know if that's only partial money, and so we're just hoping the state throws more in, which is what I suspect is the case. When I read these lists, I was really surprised to see what kind of rose to the top. So I think at this point, I don't know that we should be making significant changes, partly because a number of legislators left the room with these already, right? And they're going to get ready to do their CAPSIS requests very early in the new year. I'm actually good with how it is personally, but if there are people who want to make changes, I think we should probably get those out now, so there's time. Mr. Cross.
Thank you. Yeah, just regarding District 2, Jay Bear, Chugach, Eagle River, two of those are pretty close to the same. I wonder if you couldn't merge them. You've got road and drainage system rehabilitation in Chugach, Eagle River, and then you have two down, local road rehabilitation. So I think we could probably merge those. What I really want to point at is just that what we're talking about when you talk about road issues in Eagle River, it's Artillery Road, right? It's the bridge that gets hit. and then 60,000 cars a day drive through downtown Eagle River. Okay, until it's fixed. So one, I want to make sure, and it is also on the STP, it's in the MTP, I want to make sure that we're pointing Artillery Road. Next is, I don't know where we fit this in, but the Eklutna River restoration, okay, because I want that added. That is critical for all of Anchorage, I think, because it's a huge economic boom. But specifically, I think we need to pay tribute to the native village of Eklutna, who's got the short end of the stick on that whole deal, and make mention that they are a priority. And then my last one, and I don't know because this affects three different, is cemeteries. We're talking about bonding for cemeteries, but I've done some research and there are 6 different federal grants that affect cemeteries, but most of them drive through states. And they come from a state level and then drive down. So I know that we're looking at possibly anywhere from a $10 to $15 million bond request to get 3 Girdwood, Eagle River, and Midtown, get our cemeteries that are about all, we're at capacity. But it'd be nice to have a cemetery ask in there, because I'd like to highlight the request for the state to pursue some of these federal grants that I've researched that are available for cemetery projects, particularly in areas where you have a high veteran population. So there's funds for cemeteries through the Veteran Administration. So, but those are my kick-ins. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cross, on the difference between the Subversa bullet and the local road rehab bullet is House District 18 and Senate District I. Do you know if House District 18 and Senate District I both fall in the Subversa? Because that's the road service area versus maybe not the
You'll
road
have to
service
forgive
area.
me, because I believe they do, but I mean, at least partially, yes, because, Subversa basically covers almost entirely all of District 2, except for Takotnu Center and Davis Park and some of those areas that finger down into Anchorage.
Okay, just when you suggested to combine them, that was just the only difference between them.
Yeah.
So that was why I was asking.
Thank you.
Thanks. I want to second the request that we put in a blurb about the Eklutna River restoration. We have so many resolutions. I'm sure you can find something to say about it that will be consistent with what we've said before. We want to support the restoration of the Eklutna River. It's been it's policy in the MOA. And I think we can probably mention the draft program, because that's going to be the talking piece moving into the legislative session. That's moving towards the governor's desk sometime after April. So I think that's the advocacy we're wanting to do, is to educate the legislators about that as it moves, to the governor. They don't really play a role, but they're there and they can have the ear of the governor and they can determine if they have any particular policy positions.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, when we have the work session with the Village of Eklutna, I would love to be able to point that we put this in writing as a priority to the state. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Brawley?
Yeah, I would support that at the Eklutna. And then just to be clear, I think that should be under municipality-wide priorities and not just District 2, because then I think it, again, strengthens that it is it's always been a municipality-wide discussion. On the district priorities, I was going to suggest back to the conversation about where these are located, because I think it is tricky. I'm looking also, North Anchorage has references to streets that I think are also East Anchorage, right? So there is that, there's going to be overlap. So I'm going to recommend that we actually move the Campbell Creek Trail bullet into Midtown, because that is clearly located in Midtown. I think that'll reduce some confusion. Again, not because it isn't a priority, but then also I'm not going to suggest moving the 100th and Victor out of South Anchorage, because I think that is in the West Anchorage district. It is on the border, and it certainly is something that a lot of residents down there use. And so that's an example where me as the West Anchorage person, if I'm sitting with legislators, I'm going to point to that, but I'm just going to know, okay, I'm going to talk about my West Anchorage priorities, and I'm also going to mention 100th and Victor if I'm talking to Representative McKay or Representative Johnson. And then same with North Anchorage, I'm going to mention Westchester Lagoon, because that's right on the border of my district. So I think I'm going to suggest, again, moving that one bullet, the Campbell Creek one, just because it is confusing where it is, but also just to note that there are things that you want to be aware of what the other districts say, so you can point to them to the extent that we all have boundaries. So
Thank you, Ms. Brawley. I think as we move through working with the legislature, if we can, through Ms. Svena Clausen, if we get commitments from legislators and staff to enter our projects into CAPSIS, if you can let her know as we move forward so she can kind of keep track so we can figure out where our donut hole might be as we get closer to the deadline, I think that that would also be really helpful. Ms. Ross.
I was just going to offer that we can't take on doing all of yours, but we certainly want to support. So definitely keep us in the loop. Or if you get stuck and need contact with someone, let us know.
Okay, so that's district specific priorities. And then there's a lovely full color back sheet, which is very beautiful. Anchorage looks so beautiful at night in the snow. And I appreciate that there's Ms. Costello, Ms. Ross's contact information. Anything else about this? I want to take a minute and say thank you to all that really put a lot of work into developing this and for all the nudges to get priorities forward, especially those who aren't necessarily involved in the committee. I think overall, this is a really great representation municipal wide. And in a lot of ways, I'm just really happy that we're number one priority is the port, but we don't have a big ask. That's huge progress. And hopefully by the time we're going to Juneau, we'll be talking about the fact that we've secured a TIFIA loan and we're about to go out on the street for that construction contract for 2025. So I think we'll be able to go down and really have a celebratory piece with our counterparts in the legislature to be able to show them like the actual practical impact of their dollars. Anything else, Ms. Brawley?
Yeah, so just to recap, I think we talked about, we've been taking notes, we'll make those changes. I think the things that are still outstanding, Ms. Costello and Mr. Colhase, if you can weigh in on the road maintenance item, so snow plowing, but not just snow plowing. We're going to work on the energy policy paragraph and move that up as an emerging priority, however we want to word that. And also, I just want to ask Ms. Costello, do you have any sense from the mayor on the Eklutna River restoration? If we worded it, maybe that's something just follow up. Okay, he's supportive. Okay, great. So no issue there. And I know we made some other notes, so we're going to keep working on that. So just in terms of next steps, again, if you have other edits, please look this over the weekend when you got fresh eyes. If you see any typos or other things, please send those directly to staff by, I think we said Monday at noon. Again, recognizing that we need to turn this around for Tuesday. So what you'll expect to see is an updated version of this. We'll try to summarize the changes briefly in the meeting, just so people are aware, because I know it'll be short notice. And then the intent is to vote so that we are following, was it 21075, our statute or our code requirement.
Thank you. And I will check with Dean, but I'm pretty sure we can just pass a conforming amendment at the end, just like we do with the budget. So you all have the power to go and make any conforming changes without having to bring it back. So don't let me forget, but I will commit to working to make sure that that's available. Well, you always get to change any little Scribner's errors or things like that. But if there was some accidental thing that just really didn't conform, it's important that we have that. So again, thank you all for the really spectacular work on that. Ms. Ross, yeah.
I know you don't have public testimony at work sessions, but as a citizen of Anchorage, resident of Anchorage, I am so pumped after today to see the mayor's staff and the assembly and the legislature come into alignment like this. I think it's really exciting. And Ms. Costello, it's been great working with you, and it's been a really collaborative process. So let's go get them in 2024.
Great. And as we do move into the legislative season, Ms. Costello, if the mayor is headed down, if you can just always give us a heads up, that's super helpful, because sometimes we get calls on the backside from, representatives or something in our district. And it's just always good not to be caught off guard. Great. Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Brawley.
On the subject of 2024 session, we'll cover this more in the legislative committee hearing or meeting, but I just want to note, we have a legislative committee meeting on December 13th. The purpose of it is to hear from our federal lobbyists and just to check in kind of on the other side of hopefully passing this and thinking about next year. My intent next year for that committee, for those who are on it, obviously everybody's welcome to join it or just to sit in on the meetings, is to have kind of short, regular check-in meetings about session session, not weekly or anything like that. But just making sure that we can be responsive and make time to discuss bills, especially if there's something that's coming up, something that's on our program or something that we want to address. And certainly the mayor and staff are welcome to participate in those as well. So we'll get those scheduled, but just to note, that's the intent. And then, of course, I mentioned in the luncheon, but I'll say it here as well. I think it's February 20th through the 22nd. The Alaska Municipal League will have their fly-in. So, of course, all communities participate in that, but we plan to have a strong presence down there. Doesn't have to be just me and Mr. Rivera, the representatives. We really want to see, doesn't have to be all 12 of us at once, but love to see good representation down there. And then we will be hosting an event sometime in that evening for our Anchorage caucus, another chance to kind of do a meet and greet. And I believe that's been done in the past by the assembly. So, and certainly working with the mayor's office as well. So that's the plan for next year so far.
Great. With that, we will go ahead and adjourn and take a quick break before our next work session. Thank you.